You don't know how many are registered because it's for all the series.
Live now, Tony. Welcome, everybody, to our first session in our new series called History of Israel-Palestine, a history of oppression and rebellion, organized jointly by Y Marx and the Labour Left Alliance. Anybody reading the mainstream press or watching BBC News in the last few weeks will know the reason why we're doing this series. You will have seen, for example, timelines of the war, which all started on, you guessed it, October the 7th, the day of Hamas's attack. There will be many differences, different views about Hamas in today's audience, their tactics and their political platform, etc., their background. And there'll also be probably a bit difference between me and Tony, and we'll have a standalone session on Hamas. But one thing is for sure, things started way before October 7, and it was certainly not an unprovoked attack. There's an almost universal media blackout when it comes to the systematic and racist oppression of the Palestinian people by the Israeli state, and that's been going on for many, many decades. And this is, of course, what the anti-Semitism smear campaign in the Labour Party and beyond, and the attacks on free speech have been all about. It's not really about Corbyn or even the left, but a redefinition of anti-Semitism for exactly a kind of situation we're in today. It's not hatred against Jews anymore, but criticism of Israel. So you're being called an anti-Semite, for example, for questioning the brutal and disproportionate attack on the Palestinians, or questioning the billions and billions of dollars and pounds that go into propping up Netanyahu's regime. So we want to break this media blackout and lift the curtain and explain what is going on and, crucially, why. You could go all the way back to the Bible if you wanted to explain the situation in Israel-Palestine. And we read in Genesis, for example, that God promised Abraham the land of Canaan, roughly where Palestine and Israel is today. And Zionists will often make reference to that. Of course, the Bible wasn't written by God, who's unlikely to exist, in my humble opinion, but by people with motives and agendas. It reflects a certain reality, no doubt. There's a very rich area in natural resources and located, very importantly, between Asia and Europe. And it's been hugely fought over by various rulers who wanted to exploit it. The Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, several Muslims, caliphates, and the Crusaders. The Ottoman Empire, which we'll look at again in a bit more detail, conquered the region in 1516 and ruled it until about the 20th century. And this is the point where our series will really start in the next few weeks. The more recent history of the area, when the British got involved. During World War I, they supported and then betrayed the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire, and then together with the French partitioned the Middle East into so-called Mandate territories, supported by the League of Nations, the forerunner of the United Nations. They were breaking up a hugely powerful potential enemy, potential Arab superpower in the area. We'll look at this question, the bloody history of British imperialism in the Middle East, and we'll discuss some of the rebellions against it around Nasser and the Arab revolutions. We'll also be looking at the British Balfour Declaration, which played a huge role in supporting Zionism's aims and in creating Israel in 1948. We'll also look at how Israel has developed since and how it's become a key ally of the US and the UK imperialism. And of course, we'll look at the role of Zionism and indeed the Holocaust. We also want to look at solutions to the conflict: one state, two states, a federal solution. We're getting to that towards the end of the series. If you think we are missing out a particularly important aspect in the series, please get in touch. We're always keen to have the audience's input and participation. After each introduction, we'll have time for questions and comments from the floor. Tonight, we're starting with an introduction discussing the current situation in Israel and Palestine. We were supposed to have 3 speakers tonight, but unfortunately, both Moshe Machova and Roger Silverman had to give apologies at the last minute, and I hope we'll see them back later in the series. Tony Greenstein is with us, though he's volunteered to do the whole first session now. He's speaking for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we can take questions and comments from the floor. Please be aware we are live streaming these sessions. You know what the situation is like at the moment. Be wary of what you say. Be conscious of what you're saying. Yeah, and it's a webinar for security reasons, so we can't be disrupted. So thank you very much for joining us, Tony. And without further ado, please.
Okay, thank you. As Tina said, it was originally Moshe Machava, Roger Silverman, and myself. However, Moshe isn't feeling too well. Roger is abroad and his internet is shaky, so the task has fallen on me. I have to say, I'm not 100% fit and well, so I hope you will bear with me. As Tina also said, this didn't begin on October the 7th, although the mainstream media and for Israel itself, what happened on October the 7th was that the Hamas broke out of Gaza and for no reason whatsoever attacked the nearby settlements, the Gaza division, the army unit which surrounds Gaza, and engaged on what they say was a Nazi-style attack. So I want to comment firstly on that, but can I also say that I've retitled this from Holocaust to Genocide, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, because, as I say, the original discussion was with two other people, and now it has changed considerably. So I've kind of retitled it, but it will include much of the previous intentions, that is to discuss the situation it is today. In fact, we can't really do anything else. And can I firstly say about October the 7th, that I mean, it is undoubtedly the case that when Hamas, Islamic Jihad and others broke out of Gaza and went straight through the fence that had been built at a cost of many billions of dollars, replete with sensors, automatic machine guns, and all the latest wizardry and technology. Undoubtedly, atrocities were committed. I am sure no war has ever been fought when there aren't any atrocities, but they pale into comparison with what has happened since. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Hamas, the Al-Aqsa brigades, were under very strict orders not to, for example, kill children. And despite all the atrocity propaganda that you get from Israel about babies being beheaded, people being burnt alive, people being tortured and so on, none of this has been verified. Quite the contrary. Hostages who have been released, Lifshitz, an 84-year-old woman who was taken to hospital in Israel and then gave a press conference, she said she'd been humanely treated. The result is that the director of the hospital, who was responsible for the press conference, has been suspended and is under threat of dismissal because it didn't accord with the Israeli propaganda narrative. So I think we should take with a pinch of salt just about anything that Israel says what happened on that day. Indeed, a lot of information has come out through the grey zone and elsewhere, which shows that possibly the majority of those killed on October the 7th were actually killed by Israel itself. There is no doubt whatsoever Kibbutz Be'eri, which is nearby, and the other kibbutzim, that rather than going in and trying to rescue the hostages, rather than negotiating for their release, the army simply brought in heavy equipment, tanks and so on, and blasted those houses and brought them down on the hostages, killing both the fighters within and their captives. And this was in accordance with the Hannibal Directive, which says it's better to actually kill someone taken captive than allow them to be exchanged for a hostage or your own prisoners later on. But of course, the condemnation of the attack of October the 7th by Keir Starmer and the rest of the bourgeois media stands really in stark contrast to their turning a blind eye and worse, condoning Israel's starvation blockade and an open attacks on civilians and civilian targets, the hospitals, for example. Journalists, something like 60 journalists have been targeted, including their families, by Israel, and not a word of condemnation by those who are always willing to criticize the Palestinians and those who live under occupation. And this trope, Israel's right to defend itself. Can you imagine that Nazi Germany, when it invaded Poland and then had to deal with guerrilla forces in Poland, the Home Army and so on, anyone saying that the Nazi Germany had the right to defend itself against those who attacked it? I mean, the whole concept would be totally absurd. There is no right to defend itself for an aggressor colonial occupation. But of course, when you look at it through the prism of colonialism, then you look at it in a quite different manner. As I said, this did not begin on October the 7th. It really began with the occupation of Gaza in 1967, and in particular, when Israel withdrew from the territory in 2005. It maintained its occupation. It controlled the airspace, the sea, the land. Nothing went in or out. And from June 2007, there was a siege of Gaza, a starvation blockade. At first, they were actually calculating the number of calories necessary for people to live, and then just adding slightly to it. That really is a Nazi mentality. That was exactly what the Nazis did with the ghettos in Poland. They calculated the level of calories the population needed to survive. But of course, in that case, they halved it. Gaza has, I mean, David Cameron described it as the largest open air prison in the world. It's a concentration camp where 50% of people are food insecure, according to the United Nations. And we've seen since then repeated attacks on Gaza. It's called mowing the lawn. Every so often, according to Israeli security strategy, Israel has to attack in order and demolish and bomb and so on, in order to keep the population under control. And so we've had a succession of different operations. There was Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, when something like 1,400 people died. There was Operation Protective Edge in 2014, the summer of 2014, when 2,200 people, including 500 children, died. There's been Pillar of Defense and many other more minor operations which have taken their toll. So the idea that October the 7th happened out of the blue is just pure fantasy. But for the imperialists and for the colonialists, of course, everything began on October the 7th, because one thing the oppressed are never supposed to do, those who are colonized, is to mount an attack of their own. That is verboten, as it were. Now, I want to touch on a number of things, but the first is really the rationale for what is happening. And I want to show a video, and I'm not sure this is going to work entirely. You may not see it, but there are captions. So I'm going to share my screen and then see if I can bring it up. But if I can't bring it up,
you've shared a document now, Tony.
Yeah, the document, yes. Let me have a go again. There we are. Right, I don't know whether people can hear this or not. It's silent at the moment, but tell me, can you hear this?
I still can't hear it. Oh, now we can, yeah.
This was on TV.
No, sorry, Tony. Well, if I'm like everybody else, I can't actually hear it. I can have bits of.
Got captions anyway.
Yeah. Can you tell us who's done this video? Where is it from?
Yes, okay. This is a video by a professional production company. It was shown on primetime Israeli television and then put on the web before being quickly withdrawn when people realized that it was doing damage. So these are a number of sweet Israeli children singing what is, I would say, a song replete with Nazi themes of blood, etc., blood and soil. Even if you can't hear it, you'll be able to see the captions.
That is nice. And is that shared by the government then? Is that on news, etc.? Tony?
Sorry.
Is this being shared by, on news, etc.?
Well, it was on Israeli television. I think it's important to have a look at mentality.
Yeah, because we can't really hear that, Tony. So I'm not sure how useful it is.
Okay, it doesn't matter because you've got the captions. I'm voting. It's only 2 minutes, so don't worry. Okay, did anyone manage to actually hear it or not?
I think not. Somebody said you have to share the sound as well. Yes. Could you put a link perhaps in the chat, or we can send it out later?
Yes, of course. I'll put it in now so that people don't lose it. That's it.
Cool.
It's also on Electronic Intifada. They originally captured it, I believe, because it was deleted fairly quickly. But I think we can see the kind of themes through, because obviously the children didn't write it. Love sanctified by blood, we will annihilate our enemy, annihilation. Again, I mean, Hitler in his famous prophecy speech, which he repeated about 6 times during the Holocaust, uses the very same term, annihilation. And the quite amazing thing about what has been happening today is Israelis actually believe that they are fighting the Nazis and we are fighting the Nazis. And this has been a constant theme. For instance, anyone who saw the Israeli ambassador, Zippy Hotovely, said this openly to Piers Morgan: we are fighting the Nazis. The idea that somehow the Nazis were the victims of aerial bombing by their opponents really doesn't bear thinking about. Of course, it was the Nazis who began with Guernica, the bombing of civilians, and then they continued it at Belgrade, Warsaw uprising, and so on. But For Israel, it is a permanent victim. It has, in its own eyes, inherited the memory of the Holocaust dead. And in its eyes, it believes that it is somehow fighting the Nazis, who, in its eyes, are the Palestinians. And when the Palestinians resist, then they're doing it not because of the conditions they experience, not because of the ethnic cleansing or anything else. It is simply because Israel is a Jewish state. And this really began with Yoav Gallant. I don't know whether I will try and share again. I don't know whether I'm going to have any success this time or not, but I will try. If you can... you say I've got to, when I share, I have to somehow also share this, share the...
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how that works, sharing sound. I think you'll have to tell us what you hear.
You hear that?
מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין
Yes,
מזון,
but it's
אין
not.
מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם, ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
That did you manage to hear that or not?
Yes, but it's not English, is it?
No. It wasn't English. You have to rely on the interpretation, the captions. We are fighting human animals, was the message, and that there would be a total blockade. I mean, the first person to use the term human animals was Himmler, 1943, a speech to senior SS officers in Poznan in Poland, when justifying the extermination. A chapter of our history of which shall never be written, as he said. He said, we shall be decent to animals, including human animals. And that was a theme of the Nazis. And this is exactly the same theme that we are now seeing from the Zionists, that the Palestinians are really nothing but animals. And if you dehumanize someone in that way, then you're allowed to do virtually anything with it. And it's not just Yoav Gallant, although he is the most prominent. He is the defense minister. We saw Gilad Erdan, the UN, the Israeli representative to the United Nations, absurdly donning a yellow star featuring the words "never again." So Israel, which is the oppressor, Israel, which possesses the fifth largest or most powerful military in the world, is somehow the victim of the Palestinians, who do not have an air force, who only have light weapons, and who are really a guerrilla force. And this has been repeated throughout. Joe Biden said that Hamas had engaged in barbarism that is as consequential as the Holocaust. Netanyahu told German Chancellor Olaf Scholz that Hamas are the new Nazis. Sipi Hotovelli, you will remember the Israeli ambassador, in an interview, I think it was with Piers Morgan, she justified what was happening by saying, well, Britain bombed Nuremberg, Hamburg, Dresden. We killed 600,000, or you, the British, killed 600,000 people. I suspect that's an overestimate, but the implication was very clear that if we have to kill 600,000 Palestinians in order to achieve our objectives, then that also is a price worth paying. If you remember Madeleine Albright's saying to that effect. In other words, the Holocaust is being used to frame Israel's collective punishment of Gaza. And it's an extremely powerful framing, because it changes almost the paradigm. Israel is no longer the oppressor. Israel is no longer the ethnic cleanser. Israel is the victim in what is really a battle for civilization in the face of barbarism. So you have all these racist narratives about the Palestinians, such as Netanyahu told the Israeli parliament that, and I quote, this is a struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness. And I could go on. Isaac Herzog, who is the president of Israel, and incidentally, he doesn't come from the revisionist, from the Netanyahu or Likud stable. He was the leader of the Israeli Labour Party in the Knesset. So the Israeli Labour Party and the opposition are at one with Netanyahu. And in fact, one of the leaders of the opposition, Benny Gantz, has joined the war cabinet, and he was a former chief of staff as well. So we have a unanimity amongst the Zionists as to what the task is. And the question really is, what is the task that they are engaged in? But let us first, I think, have a look back. Zionism did not originate with the Holocaust, although it was immensely strengthened by the Holocaust. Zionism originated at the end of the 19th century in reaction to anti-Semitism, but it took a particular form, whereas most Jewish reactions were to fight for emancipation and Jewish rights. And even when people emigrated, they didn't emigrate to Palestine, well, there was nothing to stop them. There were no immigration barriers. 99% of them came to Britain or the United States. But Zionism, from the very start, accepted what the anti-Semites said, which was that Jews did not belong in their own state. Jews did not belong where they lived, that they should form their own state. And that really is the beginning of Zionism. And that's why in the 1930s, the Zionists looked at the rise of the Nazis as a golden opportunity to build their state. Zionism was immensely strengthened by the Holocaust. And there's absolutely no doubt at the beginning of the 1930s, there was something like 200,000 to 300,000 Jewish settlers. By the end of the 30s, that had more than doubled. So really, when I said in 2019 at the Expo conference that Israel was the bastard offspring of Hitler's Germany, I was quite correct. Of course, the Jewish Chronicle devoted a whole page to it and said how terrible this was. Anyone could make such a suggestion, but it's absolutely true. And if you read Tom Segev's book, The Seventh Million, which I do recommend, it's one of the best books to read, he quotes Bill Katznelson, who was a founder of Mapai, the Israeli Labour Party, an editor of its paper, Davar, who described the rise of Hitler as an opportunity to build and flourish like none we have ever had or ever will have. So when Hitler rose to power, to most Jews, this was totally horrific, and they immediately launched a boycott of Nazi Germany. The Zionists, on the contrary, opposed the boycott from the very start, and they joined hands with the Jewish bourgeoisie, which also opposed the boycott because they preferred to make money rather than save people. Ben-Gurion himself, who articulated the Zionist strategy throughout the war, was even more optimistic. He said the Nazis' victory would become a fertile force for Zionism. And actually, he was right. The Nazis' victory did immensely strengthen Zionism. And as we know, in the wake of the Holocaust, Israel could use that in order to legitimate and justify its claims to its own state. And I want to quote Yehuda Alkanah, because he was the rector of the Central European University in Budapest before Netanyahu's friend Viktor Orban threw the university out, despite a European Court of Justice ruling. And he wrote, it was a very famous article in Haaretz, The Need to Forget. This was in 1988, March 1988. And he said, a profound existentialist angst fed by a particular interpretation of the lessons of the Holocaust, that we are the eternal victim. In this ancient belief, I see the tragic and paradoxical victory of Hitler. two nations metaphorically emerge from the ashes of Auschwitz, a minority who assert this must never happen again, and a frightened, unhaunted majority who assert this must never happen again to us. And that is absolutely right. The conclusion that Zionism has drawn from the Holocaust is not that all racism is evil and wrong, that ethnic cleansing and barbarism and genocide must not occur, but it must not occur to us. There's no principled opposition to what the Nazis did. The real objection is that he chose the wrong target. And actually, sections of the right in Israel do actually say that Hitler was right, but he got the wrong people. I mean, that is really the logic of Zionism today as it blasts and it bombs its way into Gaza. I don't know how much time I've got.
I was going to ask you a few questions as well, if you would prefer a discussion.
I'm happy to do that. If you give me maybe just another 5 minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
The question really is what is likely to happen now? And there's an important article, and I'm going to try again and share. I don't know whether it will work this time, but actually it's only an article, so I may get away with it if I can. I shall first see if I can try and bring it up. Yeah, okay. Right, can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
It's in the Jerusalem Post. It was only, what, 2 or 3 days ago. Victory, she is the intelligence minister of Israel. So she's in the cabinet and she's a very important figure. And she said, victory is an opportunity for Israel in the midst of crisis. And what she says in this is that we have had October the 7th has provided us with a unique opportunity which we must not throw away. And that opportunity is basically to cleanse Gaza of its inhabitants. And we're seeing that in action today. That first, the north of Gaza is literally made Arab brine, clear of Arabs. Then the south, the Palestinians who are told to move into the south, Kfar Yunus and others towns are being bombarded. And remember, Gaza is a very small territory, 25 miles by 5. So there's not a massive space to live in anyway. And Palestinians are now being told that they must move to the west. In other words, they aim to funnel them out through Egypt. And she's proposing, I don't know whether I can bring this up. She's proposing, I mean, she says, if I go through this article, women are raped, the elderly abused, children beheaded. I mean, that lie has been demolished so many times. There's absolutely no evidence of this. Captors were burnt. Well, some captors were burnt because Israel used Hellfire missiles from drones and from Apache helicopters, literally to target every car escaping from the rave and elsewhere, as is coming out now. But nonetheless, they run with these lies because once the Zionists spread a lie, they don't retract it. They simply emphasize it on the grounds that if you repeat a lie enough, then sure enough, people will believe it. And it goes down. But I mean, the basic, what she's saying is basically that the United Nations should take upon itself with others the responsibility for finding homes for the Palestinians who are now in Gaza. I'll stop sharing now. What is to happen? That is clearly, I think, the Israeli intention. Whether they're able to get away with it, I cannot speculate. There are all sorts of options. The United States is said to be opposed to the evacuation of Gaza and wants the Palestinian Authority, the quisling Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. But Israeli ministers are saying, well, the Palestinian Authority has failed even in the West Bank to control the uprisings there. So how much more so will they fail in Gaza? But this is a matter of speculation. I should also add that there is a ground war happening in Israel. Hamas fighters are fighting, and if you read the Palestine Chronicle, where there are reports, there are heavy Israeli casualties in this ground war, and a large number of their tanks and personnel carriers have been blown up. So it is not going to be an easy fight for Israel. Whether they succeed in the end, obviously, I cannot speculate. One can only hope, but I mean, the odds must be against it in the long term. And even if they do hold out, then that doesn't mean the population itself will be able to hold out. So there are many unknowns in this situation. But I think we should be quite clear as to what Israel's objectives are in the attack, which is, in essence, to remove the Palestinians from Gaza. So I think I'll leave it there. I just wanted to say one thing, and that was we are entering a ceasefire period. I did want to make just one or two comments on it. I think it's an incredibly bad deal. Hamas, the only asset they really got are the 200 or so hostages. We don't know how many because Israel's killed so many. But in my mind, Hamas should be saying that they won't release one single hostage until there is a permanent ceasefire. And if Israel continues to bomb, then of the military hostages, because a large number are Israeli soldiers, they will execute 10 each day to concentrate their minds, because we know within Israel there is a massive movement now which wants to prioritize the saving of the hostages. So Hamas, I think, should have said to Israel, which do you prefer, killing Palestinians or saving your hostages? It's very cruel and hard-headed, but I think they've agreed to a terrible deal, but time will tell. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to ask you a few questions now, if that's okay, before I open up from the floor. I was going to start with the prisoner exchange, because not only does it seem like not a bad deal. Perhaps you're right in that it's a bad deal. Only 4 days of ceasefire, etc. It's also it sheds a light on a number of things. They're exchanging them for 200 Palestinian women and children, which they've been locked up for throwing stones, walking around with the Palestinian flag, Hamas flag sometimes. It shows you what kind of regime Israel is. There no trial, etc. Most of them, they've just been held and held again. They can just do that to Palestinians, women and children. Outrageous. But also there are reports that Ben-Gvir is hugely against it and has tried to stop this deal as being too lenient on the Palestinians, with his was it Jewish Power Party, I think, and he's of course the national security minister. Which sort of shows as well that within Israel, Netanyahu has been in trouble before all of this kicked off, and he's somewhat in trouble now. I mean, there are demonstrations, aren't there? Still mass demonstrations. There were huge demonstrations before October the 7th, but there have been demonstrations since where they criticize him personally and security failure, etc. How much in trouble is he internally, and what's the what is the mood like in Israel, you think?
I think the consensus is once the war or the attack on Gaza is over, that Netanyahu will go. I think he is dead meat now politically. His right-wing allies won't save him either. He is a discredited figure. It's only because of the conflict that he is hanging on. But I don't think he will last that long. But yes, you're right. He has Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and the far right, we brought into his cabinet. In fact, it could be said he almost created Otzma Yehudit, the Jewish Power Party. It was a fragment. He literally created the conditions in which they would gain Knesset seats by forcing a merger with others on the far right. So he's now got Ben-Gvir, who's an open genocidalist, an anti-Arab best who used to march chanting death to the Arabs. He had a poster of Baron Goldstein, who murdered 29 Palestinian worshippers in the Ibrahimi Mosque, on his living room wall. I mean, he's an absolute fanatic neo-Nazi. I mean, there's no other way to describe him. But Bezalel Smotrich, who's the Gauleiter of the West Bank, in charge of what's laughingly named as the civil administration, is no less extreme, although he's much more polite than Ben-Gvir, who's just a street hoodlum, really. But yes, these forces have said, I mean, Smotrich has said it openly, that basically we should not be concerned about the hostages. We should fulfill our mission in Gaza. Now, of course, the families of the hostages don't agree with that. For them, saving their loved ones comes before anything else. I think Hamas has failed to capitalize on that. And it's a terrible political mistake that they should have made it clear. Hostages will be released only when Palestinian hostages are released, and only when there is a permanent ceasefire, forcing Netanyahu to actually make a decision as to whether to save the hostages. At the moment, as you say, it's only the most minor prisoners who haven't had a trial even, who are held in administrative detention, who are being released. The security prisoners, those accused of crimes like murder. I mean, no Israeli goes to prison for murdering a Palestinian, you have to understand. It's only an offense for a Palestinian to murder an Israeli. They will not be released. So I don't understand the logic behind it.
Quickly then on the definition of what Israel is doing, or how would we describe what Israel is doing? I know you called it a racist state, and clearly there are racist laws, etc. The UN and Amnesty International, they're calling it an apartheid regime, which sort of begs the question. I mean, an apartheid regime like South Africa, for example, I mean, they had obviously different laws, etc. You had a small white population exploiting the majority black population and living, off their work, etc. Pure, huge exploitation. In Israel, it is really different, though, isn't it? I mean, people call it an apartheid regime. I always wonder if that's a really good way to describe it, because the aim is not, as you said, the aim is not to exploit the Palestinian population. The aim is to get rid of it. Ideally to expel them to Egypt, Syria, etc., or bomb them, etc. How would you describe that kind? Is apartheid the right way to describe it?
Well, it's a very mild term for describing Israel. I mean, the ANC leaders have said that Israel is far worse than South Africa ever was, and that's true, because the South African apartheid regime was not a genocidal regime. It tried ethnic cleansing into the Bantustans, but that wasn't very successful. But South Africa never bombed the townships from the air, whereas Israel regularly bombs the refugee camps. Israel has genocide built into its DNA and ethnic cleansing. I mean, it began life in 1948, ethnically cleansing the Palestinians, and to encourage them to move out, it massacred thousands of them. I mean, estimates of 30,000. So Israel's got some way to go in the present campaign. So, yes, I mean, it's not, because Israel is like one of the old settler colonial regimes, like in Australia or the United States, which exterminated the native peoples. It didn't colonize them. It completely removed them from this earth. And that is Israel's intention. If it can't get rid of the Palestinians from Gaza, it's going to kill them. Or it's going to try to kill them if the world allows it to. And that is in the hands, of course, of the United States. But I mean, let's just remember, when the Nazi regime came to power in 1933, its program was not extermination. It was expulsion, removing the Jews from Germany. It was only when war broke out, and even after that, that they turned to the death camps and Auschwitz. So, I mean, Israel is going along the same path. For Israel, exterminating the Palestinians is not a problem. And you saw that video where they talked about annihilating the enemy. Given that people in Israel are quite clear that the enemy is all of the Palestinians of Gaza, the president himself has said that, then it's quite clear that genocide is on the cards. There's no other conclusion, I think, that can be reached.
We had a question in the chat, which is, of course, the obvious question is why would the West support this? But it's, of course, that's a big question, and it's, of course, there's an issue. You know, some on the left think, oh, you know, we have to follow international law, and there has to be the UN needs to get involved. Sort of I think that kind of forgets who is running the United Nations and for what purpose, etc. Do you have any illusions that international law can be relied upon to solve the situation?
Well, international law is useful as a means of declaration. I mean, it's obvious that bombing hospitals, invading hospitals, bombing schools run by the UN, bombing people's homes is against international law. Attacks against the civilian population are by definition international law war crimes. But given there's no enforcement mechanism, and given the United States will veto anything that's critical of Israel at the UN Security Council, and given its own record in Iraq and Afghanistan, let us not forget, I mean, Israel isn't alone in perpetrating war crimes. I don't expect that Netanyahu will be seeing the International Court at any time, because who's to take him there? So no, I mean, to put your faith in the UN is to rest on a broken reed, really.
Absolutely. I mean, can you then sort of, in a couple of sentences, explain why Israel is being propped up in the Middle East? I mean, some people think the short answer is oil or gas, that it's just about exploitation of the natural resources. Do you agree with this, or do you think there are bigger geopolitical issues at hand?
I mean, obviously, oil is important. If the only thing that the Arab countries had was wheat fields, then I suspect that the United States wouldn't be terribly interested. But the Middle East is a crucial area. It has a Suez Canal going through it. It's the center of the world's oil production. And Israel is a vital part of safeguarding imperialism's interests. I mean, the best way to stop Israel today would be for the Arab peoples to overthrow the Arab regimes, which are the clients of the United States, which oppress their own peoples on behalf of imperialism. If the Egyptian and the Saudi regimes were in danger of going, I think Netanyahu would be told very quickly to stop operations. It's a failure of the Arab peoples to get rid of the regimes, the client regimes over them, that allows Israel a free hand. So why is Israel supporting? Well, I think Alexander Haig, the Reagan's Secretary of State, said it best. Israel is an unsinkable aircraft carrier, cheap at the price. And Biden himself said when he was a young senator that if Israel didn't exist, it would have to be invented. So, I mean, that's why it's not because it's Jewish. It's not because of the Holocaust. On the contrary, it's because it serves imperialism's interest. It's a stable settler state with a population which is probably to the right of just about any other state in the world.
And of course, UK and US imperialism did invent it. As it should have been, it would have to be invented. They helped its creation. And this is exactly what we'll be looking at throughout this series, how actually, Arab revolutions were smashed by US, UK imperialism and the Middle East divided up artificially, etc. The leaders put in place to exactly destabilize the region or have a policeman there in the side of Israel. We've got a few. Sorry, go on, Tony.
No, I agree with you. Yes, I mean, the first Zionists were not Jewish; they were Christian Zionists, Christian imperialists. Palmerston, Shaftesbury, Napoleon, Ernest Laharan. They all wanted a Jewish state, not because they loved Jews. I mean, Shaftesbury opposed Jewish emancipation here, but because it was the ideal way of legitimizing the presence of imperialism in a region such as that. So, yes, I mean, Zionism was adopted by the British bourgeoisie well before the Jewish population became Zionist. On the contrary, when Lloyd George's war cabinet approved of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the only dissent was from its only Jewish member, Sir Edwin Montagu, and he represented the Jewish bourgeoisie in this country, which was fiercely opposed to the Balfour Declaration. So, I mean, Britain adopted Zionism despite Jews, not because of them. And that can be remembered today. It's got nothing to do with the presence or absence of Jews.
Absolutely. We'll get to the question of Zionism throughout the series. We'll come and you'll be back talking about it. We've now got a few questions and comments from the floor. Comrades, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, please go to reactions or raise hand, or put in the chat if you can't work it out. Put in the chat that you want to speak. I'd urge comrades to keep it short so we can get everybody in. Peter first, please. Hi.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, I'm not like an expert on what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, the barbarism in Gaza and the background histories to that. But I'm a socialist and Marxist, and over time I've gathered enough information in a common sense way. But I suppose my question would be, what are the political solutions, and from what position we're arguing as well. I don't know what kind of spectrum of socialists or non-socialists are here tonight. You probably agree with what Tony's saying as I do. But it's about the political solutions for me. And it's also about what sides we take. And, the obvious side is that we take the side of the Gazian people against the barbarism they're facing. That's without doubt. But in terms of politics, at what point do we begin to criticise Hamas as socialists? Where do we see the solution lying? I've come across ideas of like a one nation solution where Palestinians and Israelis can live together as citizens and so on. I personally, that's not a socialist solution from where I'm sitting. Because I think part of the problem is the kind of focus and the fetish of the nation state as a kind of way of organising a civil society, a society that is humane. It seems to be an oxymoron. So where does the solution lie? Does it lie internally to the working class of Israel? Are they fractured fundamentally by colonialism and Zionism, the Zionistic form that colonialism has taken, which is not the classical form, is it? Is the solution external? The mobilisation of the working class and building that politics, and that comes back to the question of like, how do we socialists and Marxists negotiate a kind of political response that doesn't see somehow that Hamas is like beyond criticism, while also driving home the criticisms against Zionism, to come to some sort of proper political understanding that can be mobilised around to circumvent and prevent these things from happening and build a better world.
Thanks, Peter. Do you want to reply, Tony, straight away?
Yes, very briefly. I mean, the question I ask myself is, what is the goal? The goal to me seems what it was for the PLO in the early 70s, which is a unitary, secular, democratic state of all its citizens, whether they're Jewish or Israeli or Palestinian or whoever. The question, of course, is how you get to that position. I am absolutely convinced there is no solution within the settler state itself. Just as you wouldn't have expected white workers in South Africa to come up with a solution. They were on the right of South African politics. Israeli workers are on the right of Israeli politics. They vote for Likud or parties to the right. So as Martin Luther King said in his famous speech from Birmingham jail, those with privileges rarely give them up. And that's true in Northern Ireland as well, where the Protestant working class was tied to the Unionist Party. That is part of the problem of the formation of settler colonial states, where you have an interclass alliance between, if you like, the settler bourgeoisie and the settler working class. So what are the forces that will do it? Undoubtedly, the Arab masses of the region. That's, I think, where the solution lies. It would be revolution in the Arab region, whether it's a socialist revolution or not, or an anti-imperialist revolution, is to be decided. But that will be by them, not by us. But as far as Hamas is concerned, I mean, Hamas was really the creation of the Israeli state as a counterweight to secular Palestinian nationalism. It was the offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. So politically, of course, I don't support it. But it is a resistance organization. And in that sense, it has a right to fight. And I back that right to fight, of course. But politically, I'm not an Islamist, so I wouldn't support it.
Thank you. I think that answered Peter's question. Marion, please.
Yeah, I think it's really important, this discussion we're having tonight, because it's horrendous what we're witnessing. And when you think that after people said never again, and now the people that said that, some of them are committing exactly the same things that they said never again about. And I think it's really important. And I agree with Tony. I mean, the Israeli state was set up in that region because they thought they would be a safe pair of hands for imperialism. And that's crystal clear. But for me, I think what we've got to look at is what kind of solution do we want? And I agree that if we should be advocating for a democratic secular state. I don't believe in Muslim states, I don't believe in Christian states, and I don't believe in Jewish states. I mean, religion has no role to play, as far as I'm concerned, in politics. So we need to get some of those ideas about. But I think the other thing we've got to look at is the rise of the far right and Islamophobia across Europe as well, because Islamophobia is a big thing, and they're able to use the so-called crimes of Hamas. And people talk about that, but they don't seem to bother so much about the bombing of hospitals. The very fact that it has, for a long time, even the media wasn't actually advocating against what was going on, and still to some extent they don't, shows how far things have gone from bad to worse in a lot of ways. But the key thing is we've got to keep up the campaign and fighting to actually get this war stopped, and we have to be clear on our politics as well. But what worries me is the fact that they are using Islamophobia quite a lot, you know, and it's very, very dangerous, especially with the rise of the far right across Europe as well. So I think we've got to get ourselves more educated and develop our arguments and get out and advocate more. And that's why I think this series is really important, because it's one of the key things. But the other thing, that you look at the difference when Russia bombed in Ukraine and the reaction to that, and now it's a massive scale in Gaza, and they're hardly saying anything about it. You know, why is that? I mean, I have a theory why I think it is, and it's to do with you know, the class politics coming into it. But that's another story. But it's interesting to look at the differences and how they're approaching it. And they don't talk very much about war crimes, you know, and it's obviously a war crime to bomb a hospital, you know, and these things. But the UN is a useless thing. It's set up. It's an imperialist body, as far as I'm concerned, and it's not done any good hardly anywhere. And let's not forget Libya as well. What they did in Libya. Look what they're doing in a lot of Yemen and a lot of places where they're bombing them in back to the Stone Age, if you want to call it that way. So we've got a big task on our hand. But at least there have been mass mobilisations, and that's important. Now we need to continue that, because we've got to get this stopped. Too many people are dying already. Let's get it stopped, and I think it's right as well. If the Arab Revolution spreads and these countries get overthrown, and I'll tell you what, if they said we're going to block oil, we're not selling any more oil, they'd soon get it settled.
Thank you, Marion. I mean, for us, of course, in Britain, our task is indeed to stop, arms being delivered, is stop supporting the war of Israel, etc. For socialists here in this country, our tasks are quite different to socialists in the Arab countries. And I'd like to say that we have, throughout the series, we will look at different people who have different ideas on what should happen. There's one state solution, two state solution, or indeed a sort of federal idea. And I think I can see Steve Freeman in the audience. I think he will be speaking about that, but we'll also be talking about that throughout the series. Cheryl, please.
I think it's quite difficult to get to the bottom of actually what really did happen on October the 7th. There seemed to be so much misinformation about what happened. The other thing is that I'm just wondering what you thought about what Hamas's actual strategy was. I mean, did it not think before it went ahead with launching its assault on Israel of what Israel's likely response would be? I'm wondering if they have conceded to the release of hostages because it must, they are Palestinian after all, and they've seen a major slaughter of their own population. In relation to it's okay. I understand your comment about Hamas not agreeing to release hostages, but I mean, I suppose the question arises: is that really a justifiable tactic in the first place? I mean, I wouldn't want to be taken hostage. In relation to United Nations, I think that we shouldn't just be simplistic in our analysis and just write them off, because I think that they have made a lot of outright criticisms and commented upon the situation. I think that's changed public opinion quite a lot. So if anything, they've played a role in terms of public opinion, because a lot of people will listen to them in relation as being credible voices. Then the last thing I'm thinking about is the role of other countries and Hezbollah. And, I think I'd love to be a fly on the wall at the moment and know what's happening in relation to Egypt and Jordan. They seem to have refused to open their borders and take in Palestinian refugees. And I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Tony, if I remember, on another seminar, you said you thought Israel was less significant in the area given the normalization agreements and the Abraham Accords, that it was less significant in the area than it is now. That's it. And also, I suppose, what do you envisage? Because it doesn't seem from the fascists in the government that they want to, after the release of the hostages, that they want to just carry on bombing. I mean, it just is really worrying to think what's going to happen for the future. Yeah.
Thanks, Cheryl. And are they just going to move in and build new settlements while the Palestinians are gone? And Tony, what would you like to answer?
Yes, okay. It's quite a lot of questions and quite a lot of areas. Shall I first just start off by saying that in contrast to the Arab countries where things seem very quiet, we've seen the development of really a genuine mass movement in this country, such as we've never seen before. 1 million people were on the streets. I know in Brighton there's a school strike tomorrow. There's been strikes in the East End, in Bristol, and probably other areas. People are very, very vociferously opposed to the war criminals who lead our country. I think we should be under no doubt. We could see that with Sue Braverman, who was getting so hot under the collar describing us all as hate marchers, that in the end she lashed out at the police for not banning us. And the Zionists were going even worse. The campaign against anti-Semitism, which is really just an Israeli government front organization, let's be honest, it was calling for the army to be sent in to stop this invasion of London because Jews were afraid of going on the demonstrations. Well, there were thousands of Jews on the demonstrations, but maybe not racist Jews like themselves. So we've seen the development of a real mass movement in this country, and we can't just let it go. It has to develop. And unfortunately, at the moment, we have a useless organization called Palestine Solidarity Campaign, whose main interest is in building itself. So I think Palestine Solidarity activists have to take a very long look at what they need. But certainly the movement has got rid of Braverman, which I think is quite an achievement. And it came on the same day as the Rwanda plan went down the plug hole as well. As far as stopping what is happening, well, of course, I mean, the Arab states could do what they did in 1973, stop the oil. That would stop Israel in its tracks because Biden would be forced to move. As regards Hamas strategy, obviously, I don't have a direct line to Hamas. I suspect that they didn't expect anything like the Israeli reaction. I suspect they thought that after the attack and they got the hostages back into Gaza, they could then freely negotiate with Israel for an exchange of their prisoners for the Israeli hostages. That tends to show that Hamas never understood Zionism. It's true of Fatah as well. They don't understand that Zionism will do anything to maintain the supremacy of its own state. And if that means thousands of its own citizens perish in that battle, that's fine. I mean, Hitler was quite prepared to shed German blood for the Greater Reich, as we saw on that film. I mean, they talked about one state, Ein Volk. I mean, all the themes, blood and soil, that you saw in that 2-minute song that was showed on Israeli TV. These themes are prevalent in Israel today. We sanctify our love with blood. I mean, this is a Nazi idea. So, I mean, Hamas, I'm afraid, did not understand Zionism, did not understand the political changes in Israel, whereby all democratic right to oppose the war today is being outlawed. Even Jewish Israelis are being locked up if they even open their mouth. You can spread whatever incitement to hatred, death to the Arabs, etc. on social media. Nothing whatever will happen to you. But if you express concern for what's happening in Gaza, then the Israeli police are monitoring you and you will be arrested without a doubt. I mentioned on my blog that there's a teacher in Petach Tikva, just a high school teacher, who did exactly that, and he found himself locked up for 5 days before he was eventually, I think, released to house arrest. So, I mean, there is this very, very severe repression. And today, I think the High Court has basically refused the request of the Communist Party to hold 2 demonstrations. Freedom in Israel. I mean, like in South Africa, you first abolish freedom for black people, and it seeps into the white community as well. You can't build an iron wall between one group and another, as Jewish Israelis are finding out, much to their cost, and it's very, very difficult for them. As regards the United Nations, I'm talking about the body as a political institution. Obviously, it does a lot of good in other areas. UNRWA has been feeding Palestinian refugees since 1947. Absolutely vital. Albanese, the UN rapporteur on human rights, has been absolutely brilliant, as has Richard Falk in his time, and others. I mean, they have these special rapporteurs on torture, on human rights, and on Palestine. They're distinguished international law figures who are relatively independent. And my hat goes out to them, if you like. Yes, they have spoken up, and they are an incredible asset. And anyone who watched Albanese, Francesco Albanese, on television recently, I mean, she demolished Kirsty Walk on BBC Newsnight. I mean, she knows what she's talking about. So yes, but my criticism of the UN is it cannot enforce international law because of the present setup. It has no troops of its own, and it's subject to a United States veto. I mean, we can see the utter hypocrisy of the United States. Just imagine that Russia had said it was going to target hospitals in Ukraine because they were being used by the Ukrainian armed forces. And then it proved that some of them had actually been used, as was the case in Mariupol, where the Azov Brigade actually forced the evacuation of a hospital to use it as a base. The West screamed about that. I mean, the double standards are there for all to see. But that is imperialism, isn't it?
Quick follow-up question from the chat there, in terms of Hamas strategy. Do you think Hamas thought that their attack on Gaza would be followed by Hezbollah launching an attack in the north of Israel, and that didn't happen?
Obviously, I don't have a line to Hamas, so the answer is I don't know. It's quite possible. But my own view from the start was that Hezbollah would not get involved in any great detail, because Hezbollah doesn't really want the south of Beirut bombed or the west of Beirut bombed. And Israel has done that before, and it would do it again. So although Hezbollah could inflict a very heavy price on Israel, Israel could also inflict a very heavy price on it. So I don't think it wants to get involved if it can. It's primarily a defensive force, and it's a defensive force for Lebanon, not for Palestine.
They have. Can I just come back on? Can I come on that point? I think that Hezbollah have been increasing their attacks, haven't they, quite significantly on the southern border. I think there's been quite a lot of Israeli military killed, although the Israelis have been very quiet about how many of their own military personnel have been killed. And from what I can see, from what I read about Nasrallah, he was saying it's something like an eye for an eye. I think there was a Lebanese family that were killed in a car by an Israeli target, and thereafter a civilian got killed by Hezbollah. I mean, from what I've been reading from the expert on Hezbollah in this country, Amal Assad, I mean, she was saying that they have that they're much more militarized than they ever used to be. They've got a sort of specialized trained army of about 100,000 with very specialized weaponry, and that they would intervene if Hamas asked them to. I mean, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But yeah,
I don't believe it. I think Hamas do want them to intervene, and I don't think Hezbollah want to intervene, by all accounts, because I mean there have been border hostilities, but they have been confined to the border. They haven't extended. I mean, Hamas has, by all accounts, a very substantial armory and rockets that can reach just about anywhere in Israel. So I think there is a mutual deterrence taking place at the moment.
Peter Spillane, please.
Wait, hello.
Hi.
No, I don't know why you called me. I haven't asked a question. So
Right, you put your hand up. Sorry. Okay, don't worry. Goodbye. Steve Freeman.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Tony. Hi, Tina. Thank you. Thank you, Tony, for the talk. Always informative, as usual. A couple of things. I think I want to make a point about Hamas. I want to make a point about strategic settlements. What's the answer? As Tina's already mentioned, what I might be about to say on that. And also you threw in something else, Tony, that made me think, which is about where we are in this country. I'll try and mention three of those. I was thinking about Hamas. What are they trying to do? It seemed that they wanted to seize hostages, blow a hole in the prison walls, torpedo the Abraham Accords, and survive. Surely they wanted to survive. And even if every Hamas soldier in Gaza is killed and all the tunnels are blown up, the idea of Hamas will probably survive. You can't kill an idea, really, as people have already said. It will probably survive in some other form. And I think that it's not important how many hostages are given up by Hamas or how many Palestinians are released from Israeli jails. The important gain is that there are negotiations which happen and that a deal is struck and there's 4 days without war. Because if that happens, it's a sort of victory to Hamas in a way. You might say it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory in one sense. But it means that the internal pressure on Netanyahu from the people who are still in Gaza, the Israeli soldiers, for example, is surely going to increase if it's shown that you can save some people by negotiations. I think the pressure in Israel will get higher. The international pressure on America and on Biden inside America will surely grow. And it will be harder to restart the war if it stops even for a pause. And I'm not saying that it won't stop. They're absolutely... Netanyahu's worried about that. You think if it stops, how do you kind of start it again? So there is that possibility. So I think that anybody could imagine, given all the cards that are stacked against them, given the most powerful army in the Middle East is there with all the technology that it's got. Okay, so that's the first point. Second point, then, that's just observations. I mean, second point is I think the number of solutions come into two categories. There are those people who argue that there is some kind of democratic solution. You could say bourgeois democratic, but a democratic solution. And there are others who say that the only solution is a socialist solution, a socialist Middle East, a socialist Palestine, a socialist Israel, or some version of that. And I noticed I listened to what you say, Tony, but you didn't like me, you didn't argue that the only solution was a socialist Palestine in what you said. So I think that I'm in favor of one state, but I also believe there are two nations there now, and they weren't two nations originally, Israel and Palestine. And so I'm a one state, two nations position. But I don't think that if you think of it in a democratic way, that cannot mean a Zionist Republic of Israel, an Islamic Republic of Palestine, for the reasons that Marian mentioned before. We have to speak of a secular Israel and a secular Palestine in some sort of democratic relationship. So I think that secularism is important, and there is secularism in Israel, and there is secularism, as there always has been, in the Palestine, amongst the Palestinians. And then the next point: how can you have one state and two nations if it's not federalism? Because that's the way of bringing two sides together into one state. But self-determination has to be a principle. Palestine has to be free enough to be able to voluntarily join a federation. If Palestine is not free, it can't be coerced into a federation. It has to voluntarily agree to do it. So in a certain sense, the occupation has to end before that's possible. Now, that seems a long way off. The question is, who would do that? And if you're talking of democratic, and I'll finish on this point, if you're talking of a democratic solution of some kind, it has to be the working class of Israel and Palestine together. Of course, 20% of the Israeli working class is Arab in the first place, so that's a positive. So there's that happening. I mean, the oppression of the Israeli Arabs that's taking place at the moment is shocking in the course of this war as well. So I'll finish on that point because it's an argument possibly to have out more than you can do in this. And this final point is this: there is a democratic movement. 150,000 people come out on the streets. Then it's 300,000 people come out on the street. Then apparently 800,000. That's a mass democratic movement of citizens for all sorts of different reasons. It's not a socialist movement. It's a broad movement of citizens who object to this shocking, horrific genocidal war. And it's reflected in the public opinion that 76% people of the people of this country want a ceasefire. And yet the state goes to war, supports Zionism. Parliament loyally supports them. So it doesn't reflect what the people of this country actually think. So my question is, what should a democratic movement do in the face of all this? How can those ideas of democracy be continued and extended in a fight for democracy in this country? Because our democracy is absolutely failing completely. So that's my 3 little bits. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Tony.
Yeah, well, as Steve says, we have a mass movement in this country, and goodness knows how many people are involved in it. I mean, I know in Brighton there are all sorts of groups that have sprung up, Parents for Palestine, and who knows, Jews Against Genocide, and so on and so forth. And their attention is quite rightly directed at our own government's complicity. And we see the complete lack of democracy in capitalism, that the majority of people support an immediate ceasefire, but the leaders of both parties are adamant that there shouldn't be. And 56 Labour MPs found enough courage to vote against or for the SNP amendment, but 150 didn't. So that says something about the Labour Party as well, that it is, as it has always been, an imperialist party. There's no getting away with it. As regards the solution, I'm always wary about drawing up solutions for other people, because it's really for them to decide what their solution is. I can offer and throw out some ideas, and I've said that I don't think any solution that is not a unitary state will last. It will simply, if it divides into two, then you will simply get a reinforcement of the existing antagonisms. I hold out no hope for the Israeli working class, because it has made an alliance like all settler working classes have, and there is no example of a settler working class joining hands with the oppressed. I defy anyone to name me it. It hasn't happened. It didn't happen in the Deep South. Workers took off half a day on Friday in order to go and watch the lynching of black people. It wasn't white people in the South who formed an alliance with black people against segregation. Slavery was abolished in the South because they were forced to by the North militarily. It wasn't of their own accord. I don't believe Zionism will of its own accord disappear. I don't accept, incidentally, the two nations theory either. A settler people, which is what the Israeli Jews are, I don't hold to be a nation. What keeps them together is their hostility to the Palestinians. I think we could see before the Hamas attack that Israel was a house divided amongst itself between, if you like, secular Israelis and the messianic religious Israel, which has grown increasingly strong. There is a fundamental cleavage between those who call themselves Israeli first and those who call themselves Jewish first. And those who call themselves Jewish or Jewish nationalists now primarily, that they worship the land of Israel, literally the land. Not their God is the land. It's a form of idolatry, but that's how it is. So I don't see any prospect at all within Israel for any movement of any size that will join hands with the Palestinians. So I don't think they will freely and of their own accord agree to a unitary state. How you get out of this? Well, I actually think one of our demands should be that the Arab country states should stop the oil. That would clearly have an effect on imperialism and could, if it was implemented, stop Israel in its tracks, because the United States would undoubtedly then clamp down. But at the moment, it's funding to the tune of $14 billion at the last appropriation, the Israeli war industry. So it's actually supplying Israel with or replenishing the missiles that are being used to attack Gaza. I mean, it's wholly complicit. and the Arab regimes are wholly complicit. And that should be one of the things that we should be saying, is the Arab regimes are as much of the enemy as the Zionist regime in Tel Aviv.
This, of course, begs the question, though, if Israelis feel or think that, you know, Palestinians will simply reverse the poles of oppression, you know, should there be an Arab revolution, then you'll never get any kind of peace there unless you believe that Israel should be smashed and, you know, Jews should go back home where they came from, etc. But I don't think that's what Democrats and socialists would argue for. So I mean, within the context of a sort of Arab revolution, and you know, the Arab working class as well, saying that we don't actually want to reverse the poles of oppression, but we do fight for the right of Israelis to have democratic rights, etc. Do you think that Israelis could also fight for that for the Palestinians, so that there isn't just a reverse oppression?
Look, in the settler, anyone who remembers apartheid in South Africa, and even before that in Zimbabwe in 1980, will remember the fears of the white population. They'd be massacred in their beds. I mean, that's what they've. I mean, I can still remember a white woman when Rhodesia gave way to Zimbabwe, saying that she and her children would be killed in their beds by the black. That is their fear. Israel is a siege state. It has those fears. But the Palestinians themselves don't talk like that. I have no doubt that those who are liberated will extend the hand of friendship to those who've been their former oppressors. I mean, the Palestinians say that. They're not fighting Israel because they're Jewish, because they're colonial occupiers. I don't see any reason whatsoever for that to change. I mean, it's true in the past. I mean, the slave revolts, in particular in Haiti, when every white person was wiped out. But I think liberation struggles have, if you like, developed since that time. And certainly in South Africa, I mean, the whites aren't oppressed today. I mean, in many ways, they still hold many of their economic privileges. That's part of the problem. But I don't see that happening in Israel, where there's an equality of populations anyway. But as long as Israel maintains the whip hand, as long as Jewish supremacy reigns, so it will keep in check its own working class, which is an alliance with its ruling class. And that's why I say the Israeli working class has no progressive role to play. I can't see it. It didn't have it in South Africa. It doesn't have it in Northern Ireland, which is the other example of settled colonialism. So why should it be in Israel? The old Marxist conception, the working class being revolutionary, may be true in certain circumstances, though we've yet to see it in the West. It certainly isn't true in the settler colonial states.
What about then in Palestine? I mean, obviously in Israel, you know, working class and socialist forces are almost non-existent. What about Palestine? What about the Arab countries where, you know, we are hoping for a revolution from below, not just nationalist ideally, but also in a democratic socialist direction? What do you think? How you know, supported is Hamas, and how supported are socialist groups?
Well, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Arab left historically has been weak, and the Communist Party, this Stalinism, did a lot to weaken it by, in 1947, agreeing to the creation of a Jewish state and about turning on Zionism. That undermined the Communist parties of Iraq, of Egypt, and of Syria, where they were strong. Unfortunately, Stalinist foreign policy never took account of the interests of communist parties overseas. It looked entirely in terms of its own very short-term interest. But yes, I mean, that is a task for the Arab left, bearing in mind that US imperialism has smashed up umpteen countries, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Syria, whether it's Libya. So, I mean, we have a fairly dire situation in Saudi Arabia with a feudal theocracy. I mean, there aren't political parties at all, as far as I'm aware, or very primitive formations because of the level of repression. There certainly was in Iran, though, again, the clerical regime butchered thousands. I'm not an expert, of course, on that. Yasmin Mather, who's going to be here later in the programme, is an expert and will no doubt tell people. But I mean, it's a sorry state of affairs, but the left is in a sorry state, I think, worldwide in many ways. And the question is how we rebuild.
Absolutely. I think we have one more person with a hand up, and that's Malcolm, but I think you don't want to come in, but you can talk now if you'd like to speak. Malcolm? Nope.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Hi.
Yeah, I would just like to ask Tony, going back to really basic principles. I mean, one of the things that obviously is key to all this is America's enormous support for Israel, both in weapons and money and general. And it seems to me a bit, I don't know, I don't fully understand it, but Tony talked a little bit about Christian Zionism. As I understand it, the evangelist movement in America are very keen on this, and they are very much in favor of Israel, though they're not very much in favor of Jews, as far as I know. Another thing that Tony sort of said is America, in fact, is a sort of similar to settler state, and I wonder whether Americans think they should support Israel on the basis that they're like them. I mean, I really thought this recently, but do you think that's a thought in America, that America supports settler state because they are actually a settler state?
No, I don't. The United States today is not a settler state. It is, if you like, a normal, inverted commas, bourgeois state, but it has many leftovers, if you like, of its settler state formation, its attitudes and its relation to black people, obviously to Native Americans insofar as they still exist. So, if you like, it's incorporated into itself. It's because it's such a massive economy, it's become the major world imperialist power. But I don't think it supports Israel because it's a settler colonial state. It supports Israel because it sees it as it being in its interests. And Christian evangelism is really just Christian imperialism, nothing more. And it uses the Bible as it sees fit to legitimize its plunder. But yes, I mean, Jewish people have been increasingly at the forefront of the protests that have taken place recently, the occupation of Congress and so on. Jewish Voice for Peace, for example, is a major organization, if not now, is also. And Netanyahu's been quite clear. He's written off the Jewish community in America. I mean, he sees the Christian evangelists as the main base of support, and they have a large degree of influence within Congress and the Senate. I mean, the recent election of the Speaker of the Congress is an out-and-out Christian fundamentalist, and the first thing he proposed was a resolution supporting Israel in the current battle, as it were. So I don't think one has to examine in depth. I think it's enough really just to say that, well, America supports Israel because it's in its interest, and we have to, and unfortunately the Arab states have been refused to do so, is to threaten their interests and to make it clear that Israel may no longer be in its interests. I mean, that is one way that Israel will be restrained. At the moment, there's nothing restraining it apart from the domestic political movements in the West. It's the lack of any movement in the Arab countries, I think, that is the real problem.
Yeah. As soon as I said we have no more questions, a few people put their hand up. So, Ian, please.
Good evening, Tony, Tina. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, as always. I'm interested in the failings of the Israeli Defense Force. At the outset of the war, it's quite clearly that faced with real fighters with guns, a lot of them ran away or just simply failed to do their job properly. And I found that intriguing because after the Yom Kippur War, the prestige of the IDF was enormous. They seemed invincible, and now they seem very, very fallible indeed. And what we're actually seeing is lots of pictures of probably professional IDF infantry soldiers trained in urban warfare going in. But what we don't see is the 630,000 reservists that were called up. Now, I understand that almost, well, not all, but a very high proportion of the Israeli population is militarized. They all have to do some period of national service. And even a high proportion of those who were taken as hostages were, in fact, IDF reservists. So the question is, why did they fail so spectacularly, given the enormous resources that they've got in terms of both intelligence and material resources? And secondly, you mentioned about they're taking quite high casualties. I would have expected that, but of course we don't hear anything about it. Have you got any other sources that? Because an interesting feature, for example, of Britain's invasion of Iraq is the British soldiers. There weren't many British or American soldiers killed in the actual warfighting phase, but what happened afterwards, about 6 months after, was when the casualty figures and the deaths rose significantly because fighters of one sort or another had an opportunity to regroup. I understand that. I mean, I've heard speculation that Hamas had about 30,000 fighters. One would have expected them to keep their head down and wait until the opportunity arose. Have you any information around either the failings of the IDF or any other tactics involved?
I don't have a hotline to Hamas, I'm afraid. I've picked up various things. I understand from the person who is in charge of the military cemetery, I think it's on Mount Herzl in Jerusalem, that approximately one soldier an hour is being buried in funerals. So there's a constant stream of funerals. They've admitted to over 60 being killed so far, which means probably 200 have been injured if you have a 1-to-3 ratio, which you usually do. It may well be more. Al Jazeera counted in 388 military vehicles which invaded Gaza as part of the ground invasion. Apparently, the majority of those have been knocked out already, and they have anti-tank weapons and so on. If that's the case, then the casualties could be significantly higher. All the Western experts, military experts, of which I am not one, I hasten to add, have said that they're in for a hard fight. I don't doubt that Hamas have prepared very, very deep bunkers, and they've supplied them with water and fuel and all the other things that go with it. So I imagine Israel is going to have quite a fight on its hands for quite a long time, and whether it can bear the casualties indefinitely if they keep returning home in a box, who knows? Why did they fail? Well, firstly, almost on the eve of the invasion, large numbers of IDF soldiers were transferred to the West Bank to protect the settlers as they staged their pogroms against Palestinians. Secondly, I think one of the reasons is quite simply that since the 73 or 67 wars, Israeli soldiers have become really quite soft. They're very good at shooting women and children who are unarmed, but they're not so good when confronting a guerrilla who is armed and who can take pot shots at them from the rubble that they've caused in Gaza City. I mean, they are going to find it really difficult, I think, with a guerrilla force in Gaza City at the moment, and they've created those conditions. So that was why Seymour Hersh said there was a plan to use bunker buster bombs on the whole of northern Gaza and simply destroy the whole area, which is why they wanted the hospitals to evacuate, of course. I'm not sure that's worked out very well. I'm not even sure the bunker buster bombs would work if the tunnels are at a very deep depth indeed. But yeah, I just think that the Israeli soldiers, don't forget, in 2006, they invaded Lebanon after having bombed it, and they quickly withdrew after 3 days. The US switched from opposing a ceasefire to urging the Security Council to introduce a ceasefire, because Israeli soldiers had become trapped and they were losing a very high number of casualties against hardened Hezbollah guerrillas. It is possible that could happen today. I don't know, but certainly there is a ground war going on, and there's very little information seeping out, apart from what we know from the casualty figures or the burials that are taking place, and also Hamas's own reports. How reliable they are, I simply don't know. And yes, they went through the Gaza force that surrounds them like a knife through butter by all counts. The only way Israel got the bases back was by bombing the bases themselves, which is, you would think, was crazy. They took over the areas crossing Hamas, and Israel called in a strike on its own facilities, which is really amazing when you think about it. Most armies don't bomb their own facilities.
William, please.
I'll keep it brief. Apart from what's going on in the actual fighting, the support that the Palestinians are getting internationally is unprecedented that I've seen. You used to get a lot of support, but you didn't get the multitudes of people coming out and supporting Palestine like you do now. There's a education, and people have been educated to exactly what Zionism is. And while a lot of people are still saying Jewish state, a lot of people that were saying Jewish state up to now are now beginning to call it what it is, a Zionist state. And the Jews, especially in America and elsewhere, but in America particularly, the Jewish population has come out against what's going on in Palestine and saying not in their name. Now, that's a very good thing. Now, Tony said he doesn't remember. He'd never seen anything like it before. Well, I did. I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War, and we used to boast that we were the only generation that stopped the war. And it could very well be that the pressure that's going on to all of the establishments, the British establishment, the American establishment, and the Israeli establishment, they cannot ignore for very much longer the massive support and the massive revulsion that people have towards what Zionism is.
Thank you.
Well, I do remember the Vietnam War. I was pretty young at the time, but I do remember it. I mean, the Vietnam War was won primarily by, of course, the Vietnamese themselves at a very heavy cost of maybe 2 to 3 million dead. But the solidarity movement in the West was an important factor in making it extremely unpopular to continue that war. Whether that happens with Palestine, I simply do not know. But we have to do our best. That's all we can do.
Cheryl has another question, a quick one.
Yeah, in relation to Ian's question, I think the Israelis are keeping it very quiet, aren't they? The amount of military personnel who were killed. It's difficult to know how many people out of the 1,200 were military personnel who were killed on the 7th of October. And another commentator said that because of the division in Israeli society during the time they took their eye off the ball, that was the reason that they were so prone to the attack. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the question I was going to ask was about the current situation in the West Bank, because it looks like there's a kind of third intifada happening, doesn't it? I mean, there has been significant warfare going on in Jenin and in other areas. So I'm just wondering whether or not that's going to be a major factor in determining what the outcome of this is, just the kind of what is happening in the West Bank itself. Yeah, that's me finished.
I don't know whether there will be a third intifada. What I do know is the level of repression and the attacks which have been taking place daily in Jenin. I mean, I have contacts there. Every single day, the army is going in, raiding housing, demolishing them, children on the streets. I mean, I'm involved in the charity which funds a children's centre there, and they've been forced to evacuate at times and so on. So it's a very, very difficult situation in Jenin. And that's the same elsewhere. The cities aren't able to contact each other because of the checkpoints and the roadblocks. So they're very divided at the moment. But yes, it's a powder keg. And of course, the settlers are on the rampage. They've cleared out whole villages in the South Hebron Hills, anywhere in Area C, which is where Israel has full control. It's very, very difficult for Palestinians. And, you know, farmers, peasants harvesting their crops are being attacked by rabid settlers with the support of the Israeli army. Let us not forget. The Israeli army acts to protect the already armed settlers, not the Palestinians. I mean, the Western leaders are aware of this to some extent, and they have spoken out, but they haven't done anything, of course. They find it easy to condemn, but that's about all. There are no sanctions attached to these things. So they've allowed it to take place, in essence, and they're supporting the state that does that. And of course, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and others are also quite clear. They want to see an ethnic cleansing, if not of the whole West Bank, then certainly the majority of it. And the same is happening in the Jordan Valley as well, that Palestinians are finding it very, very hard to hang on to the lands that they are occupy. And that's all with the complicity of Israeli courts, of course. Although an application has been made, I think, 2 days ago for the High Court to instruct the police and army to uphold the law. In practice, that will be ignored because the Israeli army ignores court orders when it suits it. So, yes, it will be interesting to see whether there is an uprising of sort or an intifada in West Bank.
The thing about these people is they have nothing to lose, and increasingly less so. So, you know, you can, as people said, you can kill thousands of Hamas fighters and you will create tens of thousands more. Thank you very much, Tony, for kicking off the series with a really good first session introduction to the current situation. As we mentioned, we're now going to look at various aspects in more detail. Have a look at the timetable, the schedule. If you think something's missing, etc., get in touch. If you want to present a session, get in touch. We are quite flexible with introductions, etc., and the timetable. So hope to see many of you next week, next Thursday at 7 p.m. with Ian Spencer. Good night. Thank you, Tony. I know you're not feeling well.
Not over well, but I know.
All the best, Comrade.
Hey, thanks very much. Bye. And I want a copy of the video as soon as possible as well.
I will publish the video as soon as possible tomorrow.
Yeah.
Comrades, it'll be on the Y-Marks website and the Labour Left Alliance website and on our Facebook pages, etc. And I'll also email it out. If you've been registering for this session, you will get the video. Bye-bye.